we begin our ride today, because we're able to trot a little bit without going lame, that also tells me we can play with different size circles, different paths of travel under saddle, right? So instead of immediately putting him on that small circle, if he can lengthen his top line and control his kind of rhythm of the walk, right? What I'm looking for with a rhythm is not necessarily the competitive speed that ultimately I want or stride length. I'm first looking for a balance of energy between being self-propelled, I got to get these, self-propelled and self-controlled, right? Where it used to be he had a lot of forward but no brakes. He could control his speed. So as soon as I would walk him on a loose rein, we would walk faster and faster and wind up in trot, and he had a hard time coming back to halt. So now the rhythm of the walk, I can feel the hind legs, even though it's not completely stable under the saddle. I have just enough engagement that he is both self-propelled and self-controlled, and I can focus on the straightness, the levelness, and just let him move. Like there where he curls his neck a bit, that's what he does when he shortens his neck muscles and drops his back because he lost the stability through the hindquarters. So for him, the straighter the mane looks, the more he's using his hindquarters. When he curls that neck a little bit, he's just feeling unstable in his back and hindquarters, and so he tightens the neck muscles as a way to find stability on the front end as soon as he loses it on the hind end. And that's so instantaneous, right? So we kind of go back and forth, where some horses will lift the neck, and the neck muscles, they elevate the head and shorten the neck. Because of how he was trained, that was restricted for him to do. And so what he does is he shortens the neck muscles by over curling and putting the head backwards, which we call a dropped poll, an over curled neck, behind the vertical, we call it all kinds of things. So once his hindquarters are stable, and I'm just letting him kind of play with this big circle using the whole kind of riding area on the perimeter, and seeing, can he actually let go of that curl through his neck and start to find more length through the neck. When he voluntarily lengthens the neck, it's because his hindquarters have taken over the job of stability, even if it's only a stride or two and it comes and goes. So he's mostly curling his neck on the perimeter of the circle. So I'm going to start spiraling in really slowly and just making the circle a little bit smaller. So I've come in about, 6 feet from the edge of the circle. And I'm going to try this size circle that's a little closer to the size circle we're working on with the long reins. And I'm going to see, can he stabilize his hindquarters a little more? Can he lengthen his neck and let go of that curl? And I'll give it a few laps to see if he starts to kind of voluntarily move that direction, where the saddle feels more stable and the neck is less curled with a little more length. Right? Pretty good, a little bit better than my bigger circle, but still kind of shaky. He's still curling the neck a little more than I would like. So I'm just gonna take him in on a little bit tighter circle. I'm not gonna go in quite so much, but I'm gonna go in maybe another foot or two and start to make the circle bigger than we normally do, but smaller than what I started with. So I'm going to play with getting him more stable on the hind legs. The smaller circle is helping him place the hind legs a little closer to the center of his body, right? Then I have to wait for stability there, which I feel under the saddle, and see, even though he curled his neck a little more at first, if I stay here a few minutes, again, does he start to uncurl that neck? That's really what I'm looking for, to tell me that internally he feels stable enough through the back and hindquarters that he can start to really release all that muscular holding kind of from the front of the saddle to his head. So he slowed down a tiny bit more. I can feel the hind legs stepping under a little more clearly. And so the saddle feels more level, a little bit more stable. So even though the neck hasn't uncurled yet, that feeling under the saddle is telling me, give him a little more time here. Just like the small circle on the long reins, this size circle is where he starts to engage a little bit better and find more control through the back and hindquarter. Yeah, and if he loses forward, or if he starts to get really fussy or loses concentration, I can make this easier for him by starting to spiral out and make my circle a little bit bigger. So far, he seems quietest here. He feels the most stable on this size circle. And he's concentrating quite a lot, even though his neck is not uncurling quickly, but he's sort of trying. When I feel that little bit of him pulling the reins through my fingers, that's him looking to lengthen his neck. So he's attempting to lengthen the neck, which tells me this size circle is helping him more than the outer size circle, the bigger circle. So we're just going to stay here a few minutes and see if he can't get enough stability through the back and hindquarter that he chooses to lengthen his neck a little more fully, a little more often. We'll see what he gives me. Good. And the more stability I feel through the saddle, the other thing I can play with is starting to spiral out to see if we can balance the hindquarter engagement with enough straightness and rotational stability that he could really lengthen the neck even if he falls forward into long and low. Because like I said, that little bit of curling through the neck that's still there is kind of his last part of the habit of dropping his back when he feels unstable instead of lifting it. So that's starting to feel pretty good, and he's starting to slow down to where I'm having to use my legs a little bit. So those are the signs, those responses, that I can try spiraling back out onto a little bit bigger circle again and see, can he maintain that engagement? Can he maintain that stability through the back and hindquarter if I don't have him on a small circle? So now we're going to go to sort of our medium-sized circle, and I'm going to pay attention to what I feel under the saddle. I'm going to pay attention to what he's showing me through the neck. I'm going to pay attention to whether he's maintaining a rhythm or starting to go too fast or too slow. Very good. And those big blows are the confirmation that I'm on the right track. So again, on this medium-sized circle, it took a small circle to get the hindquarters engaged and stable, right? Then as I go on a bigger circle, I'm sort of testing his ability to keep that engagement, at least to a minimal degree, that he can start to let go of the holding through the front end, right? If he starts curling his neck more, I'm going to make the circle smaller. If he starts losing forward on the small circle, I'm going to make the circle bigger, right? I may even try, if he doesn't fully let go of the curl, after we've built up a little bit more engagement, a little bit more stability through the hindquarters, then I may find the complete sort of transition into the posture of long and low, completely out of this last little version of extension by going on a bigger circle, right? Because the bigger the circle, the less engagement is required. And that can have a dual effect. It means it can help the horse get straighter and find more stability, because you only need a minimal amount of engagement to get from the posture of extension to the posture of long and low. Or it could destabilize the hindquarters, because on the bigger circle, he can't maintain that hindquarter engagement. It's not strong enough, he's not familiar enough with it, lots of reasons, right? So starting on the small circle, moving back out to the medium circle, he still hasn't let go of his neck completely, but he's maintaining most of the stability under the saddle. So that tells me he's kind of maintaining the engagement. So we're just going to try our largest circle and sort of see if the engagement requirement is less on my bigger circle. Is that helpful or not helpful? And he is the only one that can answer that question. Because if he starts speeding up too much or curling the neck too much, then my bigger circle was not easier, it was harder, right? If he really lengthens the neck, maintains a pretty steady rhythm, then this bigger circle was easier, there we go, for him to fully get out of extension. But you saw I started on the big circle, it didn't work. I spiraled into a medium circle, didn't work. I spiraled into a small circle. I started to get more stability under the saddle, which tells me I'm getting more work out of the hindquarters, right? But he couldn't fully come out of extension, because I have to couple this change in posture not only with hindquarter engagement and stability, but straightness and stabilizing the twisting function of rotation, right? So I'm coordinating 3 different functions to help him get out of the posture of extension and at least get into the opposite imbalance. The opposite posture of extension is long and low, right? So as long as he's keeping a little bit of a curl through his neck, he's not quite there. He's close, but he's not quite there, which means I have a little tweak I have to make regarding the alignment or the levelness related to rotation or the hindquarter engagement. And this horse, it's always been hindquarter engagement. I think that's how he developed ringbone and navicular in the first place, is as athletic as he is, he wasn't using himself correctly. So he could perform all of his dressage work, but it took its toll on the arthritis he has in his front legs, around the hooves, right? So in order to get him to lift his back, I have to completely undo the pattern that's in his nervous system, which has been very strong, of resorting into dropping his back, disengaging his hindquarters, and holding through his neck. So long and low just tells me I'm out of that oldest, strongest, most damaging posture long term. And he's starting to find the coordination of straight, level, and just minimally engaged. Just barely engaged enough and barely stable enough through the hindquarters that he can lengthen the muscles from his ears, through his neck, through his back to his tail. And that's what takes the curl out of the neck. He doesn't have enough engagement or enough lifting of the back to elevate the neck yet, but long is always what I want. Whoop. Ideally, long and level. Sorry, we have a loose horse. Ideally long and level. Oh, we might get some trot. And that kind of excited him. We were both very relaxed, very contemplative. And suddenly there's a loose horse. Hopefully an owner shows up to claim her. Right, so we'll try to get back to what we had going. Here comes the owner. And that recovery that he's getting, like even though he's a bit faster, he got a little excited. I'm gonna try going back on my smaller circles, right? Because that was a more extreme version of the posture I'm talking about. Extension. It's the posture of spooking. It's the posture of startle. And it's so familiar to him. You see, he can go back into it pretty strongly. And then he completely lost his hindquarters with that little reversion. So I'm going to just play with quicker spirals. I'm going to spiral in, spiral out. But you see how he feels muscularly, physically, even mentally and emotionally in better balance is what gives him the resilience to come back from something like that very quickly, right? Even though his buddy just charged out of nowhere and called to him, he could come back to me. He could stay kind of focused, and he could start to find his hind legs again. And like I said, I'm kind of cutting in, making the turn a little tighter, then going back out. And again, just sort of figuring out, how do we get back to that stability of the hindquarters? That levelness under the saddle. There we go. So because this posture feels so good to him right now, as the opposite of what his long-term chronic dysfunctional use was, the posture of extension. This feels so good to him that even with that little unplanned distraction, he's able to come back to this very quickly. He's able to stay with me, even though that was his best buddy showing up for a little check-in. I've got to cut these branches. There we go. So we're going to now focus in again on trying to get that little bit of curl out of his neck by playing with more engagement, less engagement. More engagement, less engagement. And dodging tree branches on our way, just like a trail ride. There we go. There's the full transition. And for him, when he lengthens his neck and all the muscles of the top line, just for those few steps, that is a complete reversal. It's a global change in his body use. It's not balance. It's really literally a counterbalance to his strongest habits, and it gives him quite a bit of relief physically, right? It also, with that physical relief, you get more calmness, you get more attention, you get more cooperation, right? Because this is what his body needs to do in order to go further and change in the direction of redeveloping sort of more hindquarter engagement, lifting the back, right? And going into a balance that is a lot more athletic and long-term safer for his lameness issues, right? But muscularly, this is the opposite use of his back muscles, from a shortening contraction to a lengthening lack of contraction. When they lift their back, it's a lengthening contraction. So before I ask him to do that, I need to really change his habit of shortening the top line muscles, which is always associated with the back going down, or the spine pushing down into extension rather than lifting. Good. So I kind of have him back. I think that's enough for this video. There's my long and low again. I'm going to spend about 5 more minutes just letting his body settle into that new use, correcting it as needed, or guiding it back there as needed, sort of playing with a straight neck on 3 different size circles, right? Or throwing in tighter turns if he loses his ability to balance through the hindquarters. But that posture there is where I get the full change. Not balance, just a full counterbalance that is a global change throughout his entire body, right? And when this becomes easier to achieve, which I'm very nearly there, we're very, very close in the training to this becoming his chosen posture from the beginning of the ride. So as soon as this is his chosen posture at the beginning of the ride, and I don't have to sort of seek it out, search for it, let him warm up into it, when this becomes the new habit, we're definitely physically prepared, as well as mentally and emotionally, for the next step of lifting the back and engaging more and building more power. And we're going to do that with more transitions. So the little bit of trot work I'm able to now do on the ground, I'm hoping that that comes through pretty soon under saddle as well. Once he's more consistent in the posture of long and low and it comes easier to him, he holds it longer, then playing with trot under saddle is going to build up the pushing power more authentically than if I let him pull into trot in the wrong posture again and again. Yep. So I'm just going to let him dwell a little bit in this consistency this way. Then we're going to change direction and see what we need to do to get to, I really got to trim these branches, to get to the same place on the other direction today.